LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 28th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the 16 best, most newsworthy clips from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be an informative, educational media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. I will talk at the end of the show about the death of my dog Sandy, who passed away on Tuesday. I know there are a lot of Dash and Sandy fans. I would play clips of my cat Dash and my dog Sandy at the end of the show for many years, and so I'll talk about that at the end of the program because I've got a lot of news, big topic and small topic. The bad news in Ukraine was the big topic of the news programs. Good news for the Supreme Court was talked about a little bit and would have been a big story. And I'm a big believer in diversity on the Supreme Court. And I'm not talking about putting a black woman on the Supreme Court. I'm talking about a different kind of diversity that I'll talk about when I get to that final newsmaker clip of my 16 clips. But for the political comedy, I'm actually going to give you equal opportunity media bias from both Fox News and CNN. They both kind of fall under the category of guest obliviousness. Like, you've got a guest there who's kind of on your side, and you say something or they say something, and you don't immediately think of your guest's past and how there's some huge hypocrisy going on here. The most oblivious of all, I think, was Harris Faulkner was hosting Fox News Sunday yesterday. I'm not a big Harris Faulkner fan. She doesn't have a great depth of knowledge on a lot of things, I've noticed. She has the show The Faulkner Focus, and then she's also on The Five and Outnumbered sometime, or I can't remember which show she's on more often, but if you watch a lot of Fox News like I do, you see a lot of Harris Faulkner. And she had on Condoleeza Rice, who one of my claims to fame, one of my reasons for having why I think I'm qualified to do this weekly live stream is because I studied history and concentrated on military history as an undergraduate at Yale University. And one of the things I got to do was I got to take this seminar in grand strategy. I can't remember, was it the fall of 87 or the spring of 88? It was my junior seminar taught by Paul Kennedy, but he didn't really teach it. Instead of teaching grand strategy, he would have like a different expert in a different area come teach the class every week. And it was pretty small. It was like 20 students, undergraduates and graduate students. And we like split up the guest professors who to question. I was doing my paper on U.S.-Soviet military, U.S.-Soviet military analysis, or like U.S. grand strategy against the Soviet Union was like my paper topic. So one of the professors that I took to question was this Sovietologist from Stanford, Condoleeza Rice. So I actually had a significant conversation with Condoleeza Rice in the late 80s, back before she joined the George W. Bush administration and became the first, I think she was the first black female Secretary of State, and first before that she was National Security Advisor. She was the one who received the memo, bin Laden determined to strike in the U.S., and she, of course, had a lot to do with George W. Bush's foreign policy, including the invasion, both of Afghanistan and Iraq. Which is why I thought this theory that Harris Faulkner floated in her interview with Condoleeza Rice was especially oblivious, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch it together over here.
I have argued that when you invade a sovereign nation, that is a war crime. I mean, I think we're at just a real basic point there.
Well, I'd agree. It is certainly against every principle of international law and international order, and that's why throwing the book at them now in terms of economic sanctions and punishments is also a part of it. And I think the world is there. Certainly NATO is there. He's managed to unite NATO in ways that I didn't think I would ever see again after the end of the Cold War.
Really?
So Harris Faulkner discusses her theory that invasion of a sovereign country is a war crime with Condoleeza Rice from the George W. Bush administration, famous for invading the sovereign country of Iraq, never brings that up. So that's the Fox News bias. I often do Fox News bias as my political comedy, their comical bias, and that was kind of ridiculous. But I'm going to show you a clip from CNN State of the Union with Dana Bash, and they have on this guy, James Clapper, who used to be the head of the CIA. And you may remember James Clapper from March 2013 when he lied to Congress about the data collection. Remember the Edward Snowden revelations about how the United States government was collecting like all the phone calls Americans made, not listening to them, but just who they called, what time they called them, and the length of the phone call. Like, I guess you call it the metadata, or like what shows up on your phone bill, for people who remember what phone bills are, or where they show long distance calls or whatever. But anyway, James Clapper is now a CNN analyst, and he was talking about Russian disinformation. But just to remind you of what James Clapper did back in March 2013, answering a question from Oregon Senator Ron Wyden. Here, I've dredged up that clip as context over here.
Last summer, the NSA director was at a conference, and he was asked a question about the NSA surveillance of Americans. He replied, and I quote here, "The story that we have millions or hundreds of millions of dossiers on people is completely false." The reason I'm asking the question is, having served on the committee now for a dozen years, I don't really know what a dossier is in this context. So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
And of course, that was a big lie. He lied to Congress about like the biggest, the closest thing the United States ever got to like Big Brother is watching you. I think, I don't know. J. Edgar Hoover did some bad stuff back in the day, but so he is like not only gave disinformation, but it was disinformation about the United States doing like 1984 style surveillance, and yet he's on with the deputy director of national intelligence under the Trump administration, Beth Sanner, talking about Russian disinformation, and gets away with saying this with no pushback from CNN or anyone over in this clip.
We just have to see how this pans out. I personally not one for trusting anything the Russians say, so we'll have to see. But I think it's a positive sign.
Well, Putin has a couple choices right now. He can double down. He can, pivot, which this could lead to a pivot where he would have to negotiate, or he could basically capitulate. That looks like off the table right now, but things aren't going well. So I think he's doubling down, but at the same time, maybe giving himself some space in order to pivot to negotiations. Whether he gives up on total taking away all demilitarization and denazification, which means kicking out Zelensky, those would be kind of things he's going to have to come down on to make it serious.
And I never understood why denazification means kicking out a Jewish president of Ukraine, but that's for a different conversation.
Orwellian.
Yes, Putin is ordering the countries.
So that's right. James Clapper gets away with calling something Orwellian on CNN after he's like the guy who was lying to us about Big Brother surveillance. I mean, him saying Orwellian is Orwellian or whatever. threw me for a loop when I heard it, and so I had to share it with you as CNN bias, because James Clapper, he was director of national intelligence. I think he might have been CIA director at one point too, but anyway, he is now a CNN contributor, just like Beth Sanner is there, and that's why I guess they don't really question him on his own Big Brother disinformation past that they definitely should have. So anyway, those are the two political comedy clips that I wanted to start with, or I mean, more dark comedy, I guess, kind of like last week. Now I'm going to get to the news summaries from all 5 of the big 5 corporate outlets, from longest to shortest. But it's kind of like last week. A lot of the news programs had of the Sunday news programs had extended reports from multiple reporters. Remember, last week Fox News was the only one that started with their White House reporter as the first one, but they didn't do that this week. This week they actually, you'll see Harris Faulkner do a brief introduction, and then Trey Yingst from Kyiv. They all go to their reporter in Kyiv, so you can compare all 5 of the reports from Kyiv. And I actually started the Fox News Sunday news summary earlier than usual because something weird happened. I don't know. I'm showing this because I'm wondering, is it like a sign of the demise of Fox News Sunday since Chris Wallace quit? Are they going to get rid of the program? Or, they didn't replay it on the Fox News channel like they usually do. That might just have been because of the breaking news. But so they've been doing these rotating hosts for Fox News Sunday. And as you know, usually what happens for Fox News Sunday, if you watch from the very beginning, the host comes on and gives like a very brief introduction, and then they do this pre-recorded video package that the host narrates, and then the host comes back and always says, "And hello again." You saw Chris Wallace do that for many, many years. He always comes, and that's where I usually start my news summary, is "And hello again." But I'm going to start it earlier because Harris Faulkner did not say "and hello again." She broke the norm. She broke the Fox News norm. And there was something weird about her narration. You'll see she starts off with like her live "Welcome, I'm Harris Faulkner." And then they go to the pre-recorded package, and her narration, there's like an audio problem. This is like a multi-million-dollar cable channel, and they can't get like the... I mean, I have problems every now and then with my live streams, but I'm just like doing it from my house. This is like a I can't believe some of the problems they have. Face the Nation had a problem I'll talk about too with their audio. But anyway, that's why I'm starting this early. It's also kind of why this is the longest news summary, because I'm showing the teaser at the beginning, because it didn't go well for Fox News. And she broke the norm, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch this entire 6-minute summary together over here.
Harris Faulkner. Russian forces closing on the Ukrainian capital as world powers fear a wider war in Europe. Missile strikes, shelling, and gunfire, crushing hopes of a negotiated end to a Russian invasion. Ukrainian women and children trying to evacuate, facing the impossible reality of hunkering down if they cannot get out.
We just want our men, our women to stay alive.
And their leader telling the men to stay behind and fight with him. Now, U.S. and NATO partners sending thousands of troops to protect Europe's eastern edge and joining allies in punishing Putin personally.
The president is doing nearly everything in his power to lead the world and stand up against the actions of President Putin.
I'll ask Senator Amy Klobuchar about the money and the might the president may be forced to engage to fend off Moscow. And with Putin's war in day 4, live with me, former Secretary of State Condoleeza Rice. It's a Fox News Sunday exclusive. Then,
my nominee for the United States Supreme Court is Judge Ketanji Jackson.
The president making good on his campaign promise to nominate the first black woman to the U.S. Supreme Court, and preparing for the State of the Union as his domestic agenda faces major roadblocks. Can the White House pivot again? Plus,
make sure it stays closed.
The spotlight on U.S. energy independence. With the Texas primary only 2 days away, we take you on the road to the midterms. Let's get started. Welcome. Again, I'm Harris Faulkner, live from our nation's capital. Looking at Kyiv now, let's go there. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and Russian bombardment has been nonstop. Ukrainians are putting up a fierce resistance to those invaders. And the backdrop, hundreds of thousands of people leaving their homes, making the dangerous trek to surrounding countries. Millions more trapped in the war, sheltering in basements, underground garages, and subway stations. You've seen all the pictures of them huddled together. Ukraine's health minister reporting some 200 people have been killed just this weekend. Those numbers expected to grow. Among them, children, and more than 1,000 wounded in Europe's largest land war since World War II. We have Fox team coverage. Alex Hoff traveling with President Biden in Delaware, Mike Tobin in Lviv on the border in western Ukraine, where Poland is offering refuge to people who can get there. But we will begin in the capital city, Kyiv, Russian President Putin's focus right now. Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst. And Trey, it is just hitting the wires now. Breaking news, maybe a breakthrough, but definitely a coming together for a few minutes.
Harris, that's exactly right. We are learning right now that Russia and Ukraine are set to hold peace talks along the border of Belarus today. This comes after a phone call between the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. Now, this is significant as fighting continues not only here in the capital city of Kyiv, but across the country. Last night, this capital city saw a Russian missile hit just south of here, targeting an oil depot, and black smoke was rising up across the skyline as everything looked orange. It was an active war zone for the people here and the civilians who are looking to get away from the fighting. We do know there are warnings today from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry that Russian troops could try to disguise themselves in order to get into this city and launch more gun battles, like we have seen over the past several days taking place in Kyiv. Also yesterday morning, a Russian missile struck an apartment building, killing at least 2 people and injuring half a dozen others. Harris.
So a couple of questions for you, Trey. One, with this news, is that spreading? Are people hearing about that and making any sort of difference in their actions today, knowing that at least along a portion of the border, there'll be Russian delegates and envoys from Ukraine?
I think the sentiment remains the same here in the capital city. Hope for the best and prepare for the worst. We have seen this preparation from people across Ukraine from the beginning of this invasion and the beginning of this conflict. We see civilians making Molotov cocktails, preparing weapons, lining up at police stations, and saying they will use everything they can to push back against this Russian offensive. I want you to take a listen to this man we met in the streets of Kyiv over the weekend and how he described what he would do if Russian forces entered his city.
I'm no good at arms, but I have my kitchen knife. And the day I see Russian pigs here on Kharkiv, Ukraine, I will slaughter their throats.
Just underneath where we spoke with that man, there are civilians at this hour hiding from a Russian air campaign. They are staying in the metro of Kyiv, the only place they can stay to get away from the bombs falling on this city. Harris.
Trey, real quickly, reports that some of the people who have left, who've taken their families to the border, maybe made it to Moldova or Hungary or Poland, some of those men are now coming back into the country to get ready to fight.
Absolutely. There is a general mobilization order right now. Every man age 18 to 60 by law must turn around if they're trying to flee the country, stay inside Ukraine and fight back against the Russians. We've also seen reports of foreign fighters coming in to help the Ukrainians. Back to you.
Trey Yingst, thank you very much. Now to the other side of the country there, our correspondent Mike Tobin is in Lviv. That's in western Ukraine, near the border with Poland, where...
And like I said, I'm just going to show the first reporter that each of the anchors talks to. I mean, that was already 6 minutes long. I kind of pre-criticized the clip. Oh, I saw Matthew gave me a super chat contribution, a #1 fan. Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that. The report itself, it was better this week than last week. Remember, last week they decided to go political and go to their White House reporter before their Kyiv reporter. And Michael Tobin is the second person they went, so they waited to the end to go to the White House reporter this week. You think they watched my show last week and heard the criticism and so put the White House reporter at the end instead of the beginning this week? I don't think so. I don't think so, but at least it's a little more journalistic. Mike Tobin is one of the few Fox News people who ever responded to one of my tweets, but that was many years ago. But anyway, that's a whole tangent I don't want to go off on, but I think, that news report was okay. I've been watching all the different news channels covering Ukraine. Remember, last week I started with the Vladimir Putin clip from CNN because CNN was the only one of the channels that actually gave a live translation of Putin's speech, although they didn't even cover the whole thing. But neither of the other cable news channels even tried to give a live translation. Like, they didn't have a Russian translator. Again, these are multi-million-dollar corporate news channels. That's like their whole, that's your one job, is to cover the news or whatever. But and I have seen CNN, I think, does have the most resources and the best coverage. I don't know, like CNN was the first, and I don't know exactly why it is that CNN seems to have the best, the most resources actually on the ground to cover it, but that's been my sense so far. But actually, I think ABC, of the 5 news summaries you're about to see, I think ABC gave the best news summary. There's sort of this pre-recorded package that Ian Pannell did, and I think it might have to do with the thing I was talking about last week about Martha Raddatz being like really close to the U.S. military and sometimes being a mouthpiece for the military, but also getting really good access. And even though Martha Raddatz wasn't on the program this week, it was George Stephanopoulos hosting This Week with George Stephanopoulos, but maybe it's her contact. She was in Lviv last week. And they also have the best maps. For someone who studied military history and grand strategy, you really want to see the maps. And I think this ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary has the best maps and maybe the best coverage of the big 5 corporate outlets, which I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, Ukrainians are holding on to the capital city of Kyiv under intense new shelling from Russian forces. Ukrainian and Russian forces are battling in the streets of the country's second largest city, Kharkiv, and more than 200,000 refugees are on the move as the U.S. and other Western nations clamp down on Russia with more sanctions and ramp up military support for the resistance in Ukraine. But just moments ago, Russian and Ukrainian negotiators agreed to meet on the border of Belarus and Ukraine. We're live across the war zone this morning. We begin with senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell in Kyiv. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, George. We're in Maidan Square. This country, this city, is now on a total war footing. We've been hearing the sounds of battle here, but attention's been focused on the country's second largest city, where it appears that an attempt by Russian forces to enter the city has been repelled. But I think what we're witnessing now isn't just a Ukrainian crisis, but a global one.
This was the week the world changed. The post-Cold War order shaken to its core and a full-scale conflict erupting in Europe 75 years after we swore never again. This morning, Russian tanks and troops, artillery and aircraft are pummeling the Ukrainian capital Kyiv as they lay siege to the city.
Once again, air raid sirens are ringing out across the capital, Kyiv. Although there's been a lull in the fighting for the last couple of hours, the fears are that the Russians have been resupplying and are ready to mount a real attack inside the city.
4 days ago, President Zelensky was saying he didn't think Russia was planning a large-scale invasion. Today, the former actor and comedian has become commander-in-chief, leading his country in defense of the nation, saying our arms are our truth is that it's our land, and we will defend all of this. For months, Putin's kept the world guessing about his intentions, massing 150,000 troops while making extraordinary demands, guarantees Ukraine will never join NATO and that the alliance should pull back from Eastern Europe. The KGB colonel who became prime minister and then president for life has long been a thorn in the West Side. Cunning, shrewd, almost venerated as a master tactician, outwitting many a US president. But this week, a different Vladimir Putin emerged. Irrational, risky, paranoid. In an extraordinary hour-long speech, Putin lectured about 100-year-old history and questioned Ukraine's legitimacy as a state, saying, Ukraine isn't just a neighboring country, it's an integral part of our history, culture, spiritual continuum. In the end, recognizing the two Russian-controlled separatist regions in Ukraine as independent. The final piece is now in place for a false pretext Russia's been manufacturing for months, a barrage of false claims of genocide and Ukrainian attacks. In the east, where this crisis was at its most acute, Russian forces have struggled to make advances. In Kharkiv, the country's second-largest city, the Kremlin's troops met what's emerging as a defining feature of this conflict: stiff, unified and resolute Ukrainian resistance. Vladimir Putin may have thought all he had to do was pressure Zelensky and he'd fold, but the master tactician may have underestimated his enemy. Despite overwhelming firepower in their favour, the first few days of battle have not gone as well as the Russians expected, according to a senior Pentagon official. Putin has plunged the world into a deep crisis, the West now moving to make Russia a pariah state. President Biden calling it a war of choice without a cause.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
The administration, along with Britain and Europe, introducing a raft of sanctions targeting Russian banks, business elites or oligarchs and their families, even President Putin and the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time.
NATO activating its rapid response force for the first time in a defensive role in Europe. Up to 40,000 troops to bolster allied countries close to Russia and Ukraine, and 7,000 American troops ordered to Europe could soon make up part of this.
There is no doubt about NATO's readiness to protect and defend all allies.
But the troops will not be going to Ukraine. The West's response exposes the limitations of confronting the world's second most powerful nuclear nation. Today, the Ukrainian people may have the world's support and more weapons, but they're in this fight alone. Now, a US official telling ABC News a $350 million package of lethal defensive aid will also include portable surface-to-air missiles. The last time America sent such weapons to help America's enemies was during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. Welcome to the new Cold War.
Well, George, we've now got this news that the two sides are going to meet at the border between Belarus and Ukraine, although it's hard to see what common ground could exist while Russian troops are on the offensive inside Ukraine. We also have this deeply worrying statement from Vladimir Putin. He's talking about aggressive NATO action, and he's putting his strategic defence forces on a state of heightened readiness. It certainly sounds like nuclear sabre-rattling. George?
Certainly does. Ian, Pannell, thanks very much. Let's take that to Moscow right now. James Longman is there. And James, what more do we know about this order?
So you can see there, ABC went from Kyiv to Moscow. Fox News went from Kyiv to Lviv, and then the White House. But those are all the different journalistic choices. I kind of pre-criticized that clip, but one thing I noticed that was mentioned there that has been an issue I've talked about for the last couple of weeks is whether Putin is a rational actor, and that is even more in question after his invasion. You know, I talked about how it didn't make sense from his own self-interest, Putin, for Russia to invade Ukraine because it's going to weaken the Russian economy, and it's going to unite NATO, and it's actually going to move more troops up near his border, and it's over. Last week I was talking about, well, it could cause a spike in oil prices, and I guess it was John McCain who said that Russia was a gas station masquerading as a country, and then someone else, I can't remember who, said a gas station with nuclear weapons or whatever. But the point being that if gas prices spike, supposedly that's good for Russia because they make money. I watched Trump's speech at CPAC on Saturday. He was talking about that, how they're making so much more money from the oil spike than they're losing on the cost of the war. But, I mean, the ruble dropped. You know, the ruble used to be worth like, you could buy, with the US dollar, before you could buy, it was worth like 2 cents. Now it's worth like less than a cent. So and they had to close the stock market. And, I mean, things are going bad economically for Russia already, and this is just like the first few days of the sanctions. And one of the things I hear on Fox News all the time, they talk about, you know, Biden in his speech, when he addressed the nation, said we have to wait a month to see if the sanctions work. But if they're not working now, why will they work? Well, I mean, sanctions are kind of like the old military strategy of a siege. And you don't decide if a siege is working on day 1 or day 5, maybe day 30, or, I mean, it's kind of an economic siege. So, and then the other thing that happened, you heard reported in both those last 2 news summaries, is about how, if you've been watching the news summaries from the last several weeks, U.S. intelligence thought Kyiv would fall in like the first 48 hours, and Ukrainians, now it's like 5 days, and there's been no major city that's fallen to the Russians so far, at least at the time of this live stream. And the other thing Ian Pannell in that news summary was talking about is whether Putin is a rational actor. That's something I talked about. That's what I started talking about. You know, that's because Russia. It's not in Russia's self-interest to do this invasion. But one of the things I was thinking is, you know, I showed that clip of Putin last week at the beginning of the program. I showed from his 58-minute rambling speech about how Ukraine was really Russian, and they're being led by, you know, neo-Nazis and drug addicts and whatever, all the propaganda that Russia's trying to put out about Vladimir Zelensky, the Jewish president of Ukraine, is apparently a neo-Nazi or whatever. But the thing that I realize is maybe Putin believed his own propaganda. Maybe he actually believed that Russian troops would be greeted as liberators, and he didn't think it would be this tough. And in that sense, I mean, I guess that makes him not a rational actor. If he's so irrational, and they talk about how he's cut off and isolated, and I will have a couple more clips on the issue of whether Vladimir Putin is a rational actor before I think that's clip 13 and 14. But I want to finish the news summaries. The next one is NBC News Meet the Press. Unlike the last 2, there's no pre-recorded package, so I can't say Chuck Todd has the biggest, best package. He does an introduction, and then he talks to the NBC reporter on the ground in Kyiv, Richard Engel, and I'll talk about that news summary a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. As the Russian invasion began, Ukraine's President Zelensky said what the world was hearing was the sound of the Iron Curtain falling down and closing Russia from the other civilized world. Vladimir Putin has made it clear he intends to reverse the fall of the Soviet Empire. So will he really stop in Ukraine? Overnight, the Russians continued their heavy bombing of Kyiv and other cities and have moved into Kharkiv, the country's second largest city. But they haven't taken over a city yet. The big story right now is the fierce resistance by Ukrainian fighters led by President Zelensky, who have bloodied the Russians' noses and slowed their advance. Military aid to Ukraine is now pouring in. And late yesterday, the United States and its allies finally moved to cut Russia mostly off from the critical SWIFT banking system. There is a carve-out for Italy and Germany for their energy transactions. There are so many unanswered questions. Will Putin move into former Soviet republics like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, all of which are now members of NATO? Is NATO ready to confront Russia militarily if he makes that move? What effect, if any, will U.S. sanctions have on Putin's strategy? More importantly, what kind of advice is Putin getting? And is he acting rationally? Is he all there? And most importantly, is a Washington already divided against itself? even able to tackle this crisis. In today's special edition of Meet the Press, we have it all covered, from the battlefield to the refugee crisis to Moscow and Washington. And I'm going to begin with our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who is in the outskirts of Kyiv. And Richard, clearly the story is this Ukrainian resistance and Russia's inability to, I think, to have a quick invasion and success here in Ukraine. What are you seeing?
We are seeing that the Ukrainians are not only putting up a heavy fight, they are pulling together. We are on the outskirts of Kiev right now, and as we've been driving through towns and villages, we are seeing Ukrainians coming out, manning checkpoints, taking their hunting rifles, shotguns, standing next to Ukrainian troops. People had thought that by now the Ukrainian army may have to go underground. We are seeing many, many Ukrainian armored vehicles, tanks on the road. They are operating openly. They are cutting down roadsides, signs by the roadside in an attempt to confuse advancing Russian troops. And according to the numbers coming out from the Ukrainian military, they believe that they have destroyed over 700 Russian armored vehicles, 150 Russian tanks, about 50 aircraft, helicopters, and fixed wings, and inflicted about 4,000 Russian casualties, Russian fatalities. And there are numerous reports of Russian troops simply running out of fuel, breaking down by the roadside, and being detained, in some cases, by average Ukrainians who are handing them over to police, handing them over to authorities. So they are fighting back very hard.
And Richard, I'm just curious, we're seeing, while the Russian military is having success at cutting Ukraine off from ports and things like this, it's this fighting in the cities. They haven't gotten control of any city yet. It's clear in order to do this, they may have to get bloodier. Have you seen any evidence that more Russian troops are coming?
Well, what we've been hearing is that the Russians have so far mobilized about half of the troops that they had positioned around the edges of Ukraine. And just earlier today, some Russian elements pushed into the city of Kharkiv, which has about 1.5 million people in it. And the Russian troops did get out of their vehicles, which is one of the first times we've seen that, and tried to occupy part of the city. But they were pushed back, and there was heavy fighting. And according to Ukrainian officials and videos that we've been seeing, the Russian troops were repelled from the city. So they haven't captured the capital. They haven't captured even other smaller major cities. So yes, if they want to take the cities, they're going to have to get out of their cars. They're going to have to go house to house. And so far, they haven't even been able to establish and maintain a foothold in any major population center.
All right, Richard Engel on the ground for us just outside of Kyiv. Richard, thanks very much. Look, we're also seeing now a huge refugee crisis. Joining me now to talk about that is Kelly Kobayea. She is at a train station in Poland where a train carrying more than 1,000...
So yeah, you can see there, Meet the Press decided to go to a train station in Poland for their second reporter, compared to the Fox News reporter in Lviv, which is very close, Mike Topin, very close to Poland. And then, anyway, the one thing I wanted to point out, well, I want to point out a couple things about those news summaries. First, you have to realize those news summaries are from yesterday morning, so they're like more than 20, they're what, like 36 hours old or 30 hours old at this point. So I was talking about how Putin believed his own bullshit, that he thought that the Russians in Ukraine were going to greet the Russian troops as liberators or whatever. And I think some of the tactics they used were to take Ukraine without destroying its infrastructure. You know, the trains are still running. There's been bombing of like command and control and military targets, but not like massive civilian bombardment. And I think that might be, like I said, because the Russians thought they were going to like liberate Ukraine and take over that infrastructure. They didn't want to destroy the infrastructure of the country they were liberating, right? But one of the things that's been happening since the news reports today is there's been a lot more bombardment of Kharkiv, which is the biggest city next to the Russian border there. I've seen a lot of residential civilian areas being hit by these missiles that where if Russians change tactics, they may not have taken Kyiv in 48 hours, but that doesn't mean that the Russians are eventually going to lose. And I've also seen reports in the last several hours that, are not known to the news reporters that you just saw or you're going to see, that there's this like 17-mile long armor column that's like 10 miles away from Kyiv right now, and it's like plowing its way towards the city. And I mean, I am all for giving kudos to the Ukrainian people for how hard they fought in these first 5 days, but that doesn't mean that over time the Russian forces aren't going to take over the cities. And I mean, that was what people were expecting to begin with, that Kyiv would fall within 48 hours and then it would be like a Ukrainian insurgency, and that could still happen. But I'm just saying, I talked about bad news in Ukraine in the title, but actually there's been a lot of good news so far in terms of Russia not being as effective militarily as some people thought. But I think it's quite possible that's going to be temporary, unfortunately. But that's, if you just look at the balance of forces as someone with some background in military history and military strategy, and like I said, that's something I studied in college. So, and especially I studied U.S. grand strategy in the U.S.-Soviet conflict, and this is kind of like what we were studying at the time, although we were studying how the Soviet tanks would roll into Germany when they already had Ukraine and Poland and all the Warsaw Pact countries. But anyway, that is my commentary I wanted to add after watching that news summary. But now I'm going to go to the CNN State of the Union news summary. And usually CNN State of the Union plays at 6 a.m. Pacific here in California. And then there's a replay at 9 a.m. that's totally a recording of the 6 a.m. version. Well, that didn't happen this week because of all the breaking news. And actually in the second live version at 9 a.m., Dana Bash didn't even say what the State of the Union this week was. And so I recorded the State of the Union this week from 6 a.m. Actually, I record the shows usually on a TiVo, an actual TiVo, not just a DVR, but a brand name TiVo. And one of the problems with that is you record programs, and if they start them a minute or two early, they get cut off. So I'm going to play this. Actually, they started CNN State of the Union with breaking news at I think it was 5:58. And this is what I saw to start off the CNN State of the Union news summary, where Dana Bash actually says our State of the Union this week over here.
CNN special report, the Alex Jones story, tonight at 10.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I started it a little early because it shows an ad for this. There was this CNN news program they've been promoting day after day about Alex Jones, and then there are all these people protesting, CNN, don't promote Alex Jones. Alex Jones has enough followers already. And you can see they were still promoting it yesterday morning, but turns out they decided not to do it. They didn't play the Alex Jones program. I don't know if it was because of all the breaking news or they just gave in to the pressure, but that's why I started this with the Alex Jones promo that never happened. They never showed this Alex Jones program over here.
CNN special report, the Alex Jones story, tonight at 10.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is watching with horror, but also admiration. We have breaking news this morning. Ukraine has agreed to talks with Russia as Russian forces continue their assault on Ukraine's largest cities. The talks could come as soon as today, and they will be held at the Belarusian border. That's according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's office. The news of talks comes as Russians advanced into Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, where street fighting broke out as Ukrainian forces try to hold back the invasion. In Ukraine's largest city, the capital, Kyiv, the mayor said this morning there was no Russian presence in the city. After
See, there was my little like TiVo delete this recording. You saw the little TiVo dialogue box come up there at the end because that was actually, even though that's the beginning of CNN's State of the Union, it was recorded at the end of CNN Inside Politics, which goes from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. and but no big deal because Dana Bash came back at 9 a.m. Pacific time and did the whole program over again, or at least claimed to, and this was actually, I think, bad journalism on CNN's part because they replayed some of the interviews that they did during the 6 a.m. hour, like the Mitt Romney one I'm going to show you a clip of in a little bit, but they kept it saying live the whole time, like it was a live interview when it wasn't a live interview. But anyway, with that critique, I will show you the actual CNN State of the Union news summary, but this time without what the State of the Union this week is that they did during the special live hour 3 hours later over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington. Welcome to a special live hour of State of the Union. And we are following breaking news. Ukraine has agreed to talks with Russia as Russia presses forward with an unprovoked invasion. The talks are set to take place without preconditions on the Belarusian border, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's office. They are scheduled for Monday morning local time, but Russia is cranking up the pressure. President Vladimir Putin ordered his country's deterrence forces, which include nuclear arms, to be placed on high alert, a potentially destabilizing move in an already volatile situation. This after a night of attacks on Ukraine's two largest cities, Kyiv and Kharkiv. In Ukraine's largest city, the capital, the mayor of Kyiv said this morning that there were no Russian troops in the city after Ukrainian forces destroyed a column of Russian personnel carriers and other vehicles on the Kyiv outskirts. And CNN is reporting that, according to two senior U.S. officials, Russians are encountering, quote, stiffer than expected resistance from Ukrainians. Late Saturday, the U.S. and Europe announced new financial punishments against Russia, removing several Russian banks from the global financial system known as SWIFT and sanctioning the Central Russian Bank. That would be a big move without precedent for an economy of Russia's size. I want to get straight for the latest to CNN Chief International Correspondent Clarissa Ward in Ukraine. So, Clarissa, you're in Kyiv. It is evening, as we can see, extremely dark. What is the latest there?
Well, Dana, the evening started like pretty much every evening does here with those air raid sirens that we've become so accustomed to hearing. And you mentioned how dark it is, and that's because people have really been told to keep their lights down. We've been told to take our live shot position off the roof, also to limit the amount of lights that we use. So that's why our shot might look a little more dim than usual. And despite the announcement of those negotiations that are expected to take place tomorrow on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border near the Pripyat River, there hasn't really been any let up in the sort of booms and blasts that we hear every evening here. I should underscore that it's difficult to know what's incoming and what's outgoing, but there's certainly been a fair amount of activity continuing. President Volodymyr Zelensky said about those negotiations to take place tomorrow morning that he doesn't necessarily expect that they will bear any fruit, but he wants to be open to every opportunity to try to de-escalate this situation. Initially, he had said that he did not want to go to Belarus for these talks because obviously Belarus is not a neutral actor in this. They have been working hand in glove with President Putin. And of course, there are many, many thousands of Russian troops in and around Belarus at the moment. So significant that they did shift their position and agree to meet at the border But here on the ground, as I mentioned, we continue to hear the sounds of war going on, and certainly that's been in the case in the country's second city, Kharkiv, as well, Dana.
Clarissa Ward, thank you so much for that reporting and all of the reporting that you and our colleagues there on the ground are doing. It's really, really important and breathtaking. Thank you so much. And today, the United Nations will vote to hold a rare emergency session Monday on the Russian invasion. Joining me now is the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. Madam Ambassador, thank you.
And that was not a live interview, even though it said live down in the corner, because it actually occurred in 3 hours previously on CNN State of the Union. So that's dishonest for CNN to do. So that's another piece of media criticism for CNN after I criticized CNN for having James Clapper on to say the word Orwellian when he was one of the biggest promoters of Big Brotherism ever in U.S. history. And anyway, but don't want to go back into that. But the other thing, the other thing about CNN is they didn't have any second reporter. They just had Clarissa Ward reporting from Kyiv, and then they went to their pre-recorded interview there. I mean, that's an okay journalistic choice, but you notice most of the other news programs have first they have a reporter in Kyiv, and then they have someone from somewhere else. Several of them have 3 different reporters that they started the programs with. And the next report, actually, the final report is CBS News Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan puts it over to Charlie D'Agata. And I don't know, I said ABC was the best one, but this one I think is also pretty good. And I don't know, I'm about to show you the 5th of the 5, and you can tell me which one you think was best after we watch this 5th one together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. The reality of a European capital city being bombed by Russia as the war in Ukraine rages is still hard to fathom. The situation is getting more dire by the hour as the Russian military news surrounding most of Ukraine tightens. But Ukrainians are literally fighting in the streets to defend the key cities of Kyiv and Kharkiv. If there's any good news, it's the overwhelming international show of support for Ukraine and President Volodymyr Zelensky. In the past 24 hours, the U.S. and allies ratcheted up financial pressure on Putin with massive sanctions. And in return for those tougher sanctions, Putin has put his nuclear deterrence forces on high alert. CBS's David Martin is here for more on that. But first, we begin with Charlie D'Agata in Kyiv. Charlie?
Good morning, Margaret. The Ukrainian president has accused Russia of intentionally targeting civilian areas in another night of artillery and airstrikes here in the capital. But Russian troops have run into fierce resistance as Ukrainian forces hold ground, and no major city has been captured. The Russian military expanded its aerial onslaught overnight, taking aim at oil and gas facilities in a wave of attacks. In Ukraine's second city of Kharkiv, street battles are underway as Ukrainian soldiers and civilians struggle to keep control of the city. In Kyiv, a missile tears through an apartment block, where we found dazed and displaced residents dragging belongings away. This is some of the debris and rubble that rained down from this apartment block after a missile strike. The Russian military says this is not one of ours, instead blaming Ukrainian air defenses for going off target. Many have sought shelter deep underground in the city's subway network. Angelina moved here from Crimea after the Russian military invaded there in 2014.
You don't know what to do. You're just scared and that's all. But now I know what to do.
The government has called on men 18 to 60 to step up and fight, handing out around 18,000 weapons. They don't want us revealing this location because they don't want it to be a target for the Russian military. But we have seen a steady stream of volunteers. The commander told us it's not hundreds, but thousands, very few with any military experience, every single one of them ready to fight. Ukraine's soldiers and reservists now man checkpoints in the city streets on the hunt for plainclothes Russian saboteurs trying to infiltrate the capital. Now, explosions have continued overnight and really throughout the day here. To give you an idea of how tense it is, the mayor has ordered everyone off the streets until at least tomorrow at 8 a.m., saying anyone caught outside will be considered an enemy. Margaret?
Charlie D'Agata, stay safe. The United Nations estimates that up to 5 million Ukrainians may flee to neighboring countries. Christina Ruffini has been following refugees crossing that border into Poland. Here's her report.
We say.
So yeah, there you can see CBS News Face the Nation went first to Charlie D'Agata in Kyiv, like everyone went to someone in Kyiv, and then several people went to some place near Poland. There was the train station in Poland, there was Lviv, and that report also about the refugee crisis, which is part of this crisis. But anyway, there you see the 5 different news summaries. You can tell me which one you think was best, which one you think was worst, or juxtapose them all and think about the commentary I already gave you. But I want to get into the newsmaker clips. And the first one, this one almost made it to the political comedy clip at the beginning. This is again Fox News bias. This has, and actually the next several clips are about this weird Republican love of Putin. There's this whole like Putin wing of the Republican Party, and Fox News was really advocating for how smart Putin was and how we shouldn't necessarily take, Tucker Carlson was saying, why should I hate Putin? Has he ever called me a racist? Has he ever tried to get me fired? There was this whole, I could have used that for my political comedy clip, but, and various other people on Fox News have been claiming that we should be on Putin's side for, as I have explained for the last few weeks, that Putin is like the leader of the white Christian European traditionalists that are trying to save Europe from immigrants, and I don't know, they have these like weird racism again. He has this weird racism between like Slavs and Anglo-Saxons, or I can't even follow some of it, but he is the savior of the white Christian European, I guess, according to Putin himself, and as I talked about over the last few weeks. And I think that may be why he has some appeal for Republicans. And that's actually Donald Trump called Putin a genius in the last week or so. Mike Pompeo also talked about how shrewd and smart he was. And Donald Trump praised him when he talked at CPAC on Saturday. They didn't show that on Fox News Sunday, but they did show him talking about how he was the only 21st century president not to preside over a Russian invasion of its neighbors. And Harris Faulkner picked up on that and asked, wait, I showed you earlier that Condoleeza Rice was on the program. Condoleeza Rice was Secretary of State when Putin invaded Georgia in August 2008, right before the election. And that is not the clip I'm about to show you, because Harris Faulkner didn't ask Condoleeza Rice about it. She asked Amy Klobuchar for no apparent reason. Democratic senator from Minnesota, like she has to answer for what Obama and Bush and happened under, well, I guess she might be capable of answering for what happened in the Biden administration right now. But anyway, here is Harris Faulkner showing a Trump clip to Amy Klobuchar that I'm only showing you because she didn't show it to Condoleezza Rice in the next clip. But here's the Amy Klobuchar clip, and I think Amy Klobuchar did a pretty good job of responding. I actually say kudos to Amy Klobuchar for going on Fox News and giving some true facts to the Fox News viewers. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Look, he was probably betting on something that former President Donald Trump brought up at CPAC, the largest gathering of conservatives last night. He was betting on the fact that Trump might still be the only one that wouldn't see an invasion on his watch. Have you seen this? Watch.
Under Bush, Russia invaded Georgia. Under Obama, Russia took Crimea. Under Biden, Russia invaded Ukraine. I stand as the only president of the 21st century on whose watch Russia did not invade another country.
Your reaction?
I have real trouble with that because I was in Ukraine with Senator McCain and Senator Lindsey Graham, stood on those front lines. And I will say, while Donald Trump was president, Russia remained in Crimea, and there was still, of course, major problems in the Donbass region. Secondly, it was Donald Trump that signed the agreement to bring the troops home from Afghanistan. So, and it is Donald Trump who recently praised Vladimir Putin as being a genius and did the same thing throughout his presidency. So yeah, I have problems with that. But you know what? I don't want to dwell on that right now. What I want to dwell on, which I just talked to Secretary Rice, was how we go forward, Democrats and Republicans together. That means standing tall, showing who we support, Ukrainians,
your Ukraine
my flag, and making very clear that we're going to get them the aid and the help that they need.
Yeah, 2 points that I would double back if we had a whole hour. Why President...
And she says after that, Biden didn't move fast, and she starts criticizing Biden. But anyway, I mean, I guess it's okay for Fox News and Harris Faulkner to show that Trump clip to Amy Klobuchar, although they didn't show any of the clips of Trump actually praising Putin as smart and all that. But if Fox News and Harris Faulkner are going to show that clip of Trump saying he's the only 21st century U.S. president not to have a Russian invasion because Bush and Obama and Biden have all had Russian invasions during their terms, shouldn't she have shown that clip to Condoleeza Rice? Oh, well, I guess maybe the subject of what happened in Georgia in August 2008 never really came up, so you can't really fault her if the subject never came up. Oh, but the subject did come up, and she never brought it up over here.
Put some more into perspective now. Back in 2008, you were one of the first world leaders to fly to Georgia when the Russian military was still making moves there. Actively, you were involved in the ceasefire negotiations. What does it take to get Putin there today? Do we know well enough what he wants?
Well, he has done things in Ukraine that, frankly, he didn't do in Georgia. I mean, the campaign in Georgia was relatively fast. And I just might note, there were pictures this morning of massive protests in Georgia against this war. Let's remember that the Georgian government, the government of Mikhail Saakashvili, remained in power. The Russians had actually said, personally to me, that they wanted Saakashvili gone. And I told them, we don't have secret talks about removing a Georgian president. And so the very fact that the Georgian government not only survived, but today Georgians are free to protest the Russians, says that maybe he didn't even achieve his goals there. Frustrating him, that's what it takes to get him to back off. And when Russian soldiers are dying, and by the way, it's very hard now to keep everything quiet. I'm very pleased that the administration was releasing intelligence about what he was doing and what he was going to do.
Along the way.
Reading his mail, he's got to be wondering, who are these people around me that were talking to the Americans? It will feed his own paranoia about his own inner circle.
Fascinating.
Uh-oh, Condoleezza Rice said some good things about the Biden administration on Fox News. You don't want to see that. But also, as I said before I showed the clip, there's extensive discussion of Georgia, no showing of the clip of, I'm talking about Russian invasion of Georgia in August 2008, which for some reason Harris Faulkner and Fox News decided they need to ask Senator Amy Klobuchar about, but not George W. Bush's Secretary of State during the Russian invasion of Georgia. That I don't understand that at all. And also, like I said, they didn't really show the clips of Trump praising Putin or ask about Trump praising Putin and having nothing to say to Putin when he was asked about it on Fox News. But at least over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, when George Stephanopoulos had one of the Republican senators on, Senator Tom Cotton, he brought it up and he asked him repeatedly, but would not. Senator Tom Cotton didn't want to criticize Donald Trump because, he doesn't want to lose any of the Trump voters when he runs for president in 2024, which I guess he's going to do. And Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas would be one of the worst. I mean, could there be a worse president than Donald Trump? I don't think so, but maybe. But you can see him. He's got his stock answer to any questions about Donald Trump, and he's sticking to it despite the best efforts of George Stephanopoulos over in this clip.
It is true. You've been stalwart in your opposition to Vladimir Putin. The same cannot be said for the leader of your party, Donald Trump. Last night, he finally condemned the invasion, but he also repeated his praise of Putin, calling him smart. Earlier in the week, he called him pretty smart. He called him savvy. He says NATO and the U.S. are dumb. Are you prepared to condemn that kind of rhetoric from the leader of your party?
George, you've heard what I have to say about Vladimir Putin, that he is a ruthless dictator who's launched a naked, unprovoked war of aggression. Thankfully, the Ukrainian army has anti-tank missiles that President Obama would not supply, that we did supply last time Republicans were in charge in Washington. That's why it's so urgent that we continue to supply those weapons to Ukraine.
Why can't you condemn Donald Trump for those comments?
George, if you want to know what Donald Trump thinks about Vladimir Putin or any other topic, I'd encourage you to invite him on your show. I don't speak on behalf of other politicians. They can speak for themselves. I speak on behalf of Arkansans, who I talked to this week and who are appalled at what they saw in Ukraine, and they want me right now to fight in Washington to support those brave Ukrainians.
You're a senior member of the Republican Party. Donald Trump is the leader of the Republican Party. He said last night again, suggested that he would be running for president. When Fox News asked him if he had a message for Vladimir Putin, he said he has no message. Why can't you condemn that? I feel quite confident that if Barack Obama or Joe Biden said something like that, you'd be first in line to criticize him.
Again, George, if you want to talk to the former president about his views or his message, you can have him on your show. My message to Vladimir Putin is quite clear. He needs to leave Ukraine unless he wants to face moms and teenagers with Molotov cocktails and grandmothers and grandfathers with AK-47s for years to come. I'm speaking on behalf of all Arkansans who want me to send that message to him.
If Donald Trump runs again, can you support him?
George, I'm not worried about this fall's election right now, much less an election 2 years from now. I'm focused on the naked war of aggression that Vladimir Putin has launched in Ukraine right now. There's not a moment to lose. We can worry about electoral politics down the road.
Former President Trump was out there talking about it last night. I simply don't understand why you can't condemn his praise of Vladimir Putin.
George, again, I don't speak on behalf of other politicians. They can all speak for themselves. I'm delivering my message to you, which I said has been clear, whether Barack Obama was president, whether Donald Trump was president, and now whether Joe Biden was president, that Vladimir Putin has been a ruthless dictator for years. Too many people have not taken the threat seriously, and that's why you see the images we see in Ukraine now. And where we need to focus is on stopping that aggression, supporting the Ukrainians as best we can.
Senator Cotton, thanks for your time this morning.
So valiant effort on George Stephanopoulos' part, but could not get Tom Cotton to criticize Donald Trump despite his inexplicable praise for Vladimir Putin, which is something that Trump has been doing for all the years he's been in politics. I don't exactly why that is. It could have something to do with the Trump campaign's collusion with Russia that Trump again called a hoax, even though it's not a hoax, because there's I don't want to go into all the evidence for Russia collusion again, but I want to show the couple Republicans who are willing to call out the Putin wing of the Republican Party that seems to have developed in the last several weeks. This is Mitt Romney over on CNN State of the Union responding to a question from Dana Bash about a tweet from Liz Cheney. And I did not vote for Mitt Romney in 2012. I'm not a big fan of Liz Cheney, but I'm just saying that they are Republicans who deserve praise for not being, almost treasonous, I guess is what Romney says in this next clip. And that's a very low bar. That doesn't mean I think that either Romney or Cheney are great politicians or worthy of praise in general, but just compared to the Putin wing of the Republican Party, perhaps, as I will discuss with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
You talked several times during this interview about the world seeing the difference between good and evil. I want to bring that closer to home and talk about something that Congresswoman Liz Cheney tweeted yesterday about sitting Republican House members appearing at a white nationalist gathering. She said, quote, as Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar speak at this white supremacist, anti-Semitic, pro-Putin event, silence by Republican Party leaders is deafening and enabling. All Americans should renounce this garbage and reject the Putin wing of the GOP now. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Liz Cheney was right with that statement, and she's been right for a long time. And I also saw that Ronna McDaniel came out with a statement as well, talking about how repugnant these white nationalists are. Look, there's no place in either political party for this white nationalism or racism. It's simply wrong. It's as you've indicated, speaking of evil, it's evil as well. And you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar, I don't know them, but I'm reminded of that old line from the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid movie where one character says, morons, I've got morons on my team. And I have to think anybody that would sit down with white nationalists and speak at their conference was certainly missing a few IQ points.
And just more broadly, the pro-Putin sentiment that you are seeing from some corners of your party.
Well, a lot of those people are changing their stripes as they're seeing the response of the world and the political response here in the U.S. But how anybody in this country, which loves freedom, can side with Vladimir Putin, which is an oppressor, a dictator. He kills people. He imprisons his political opponents. He has been an adversary of America at every chance he's had. It's unthinkable to be. It's almost treasonous, and it just makes me ill to see some of these people do that. But of course they do it because they think it's shock value and it's going to get them more eyeballs and maybe make a little more money for them or their network. It's disgusting, and I'm hopeful that you're seeing some of those people recognize just how wrong they were.
Treasonous is a big word, so I just have to quickly follow up. Would that include the former president?
Well, I said it's nearly treasonous. There's standing up for freedom is the right thing to do in America, and anything less than that, in my opinion, is unworthy of American support.
Meanwhile, I know that you're well aware that something big is coming your way to the United States Senate, and that is a Supreme Court nominee.
Oh, and I will have a clip on the Supreme Court nomination, but morons, I've got morons on my side from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I like Romney a lot more than when I didn't vote for him in 2012, I guess, but I'm not saying I would vote for him ever, but he has done some things that show, although in parts of that interview, he was really pro-fossil fuel in ways that I could never support, and there are like so many things that he does that I couldn't support, but anyway, I like that answer anyway, and when he said nearly treasonous or almost treasonous, I guess that's a little bit of a caveat that lets him get away with that, because if you read your U.S. Constitution, I happen to have my ACLU version of the U.S. Constitution here, you'll see treason is specifically defined and only applies when you give aid and comfort to a country against which we have a declared war. A declared war. We don't have a declared war against Russia, so giving aid and comfort to Russia is not treason, because treason is specifically defined in the Constitution. I just wanted to point that out. The other thing that I thought Dana Bash let Romney get away with there is he not only praised Representative Liz Cheney, but he also slipped in a praise for the head of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, who I think I'm not sure how she's related to Romney. I'm pretty sure she's his niece, but at Trump's insistence, Ronna McDaniel dropped her Romney. She used to be Ronna Romney McDaniel, and she has been like way too supportive of Trump and his lies about the 2020 election being stolen. If I were a journalist interviewing Mitt Romney, I wouldn't let him get away with praising Ronna McDaniel without mentioning she's Ronna Romney McDaniel and that she has engaged in a lot of nefarious shit that he is not mentioning. So anyway, that was the last of the clips on the Putin wing of the Republican Party I wanted to show you. I did see along the way that I got a super chat contribution from Lulu Girl and then from Tom Trask, so I appreciate that. Keeping the show going, and I don't know, worth my time, maybe, sort of, I don't know. But the next couple clips here are the clips I talked about earlier as to whether Vladimir Putin is a rational actor. This is something Condoleeza Rice also talked about, and she seemed to think he was less than rational. But I didn't take that clip because I already showed you multiple Condoleeza Rice clips. This clip is from the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So if U.S. intelligence knows anything about physical or mental problems that Vladimir Putin is having, he would definitely know. And, you know, my family has a friend, one of my wife's close friends is Ukrainian, and she reported to me that there's this, who has family in Ukraine, there's this rumor that Vladimir Putin has like stage 4 cancer, and you know, that's just a rumor, right? But I have heard like various different kinds of reporting on him being sick or isolated or mentally ill or not. You know, it's all having to do with this rationality question. And Marco Rubio tweeted this thing over the weekend that made it seem like U.S. intelligence knows something about him, that he's not the same Putin he used to be, or there's something wrong with him. And anyway, that is what Senator Mark Warner was asked about by Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press in the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
I got to ask you about something that the ranking member in your Intel committee said, tweeted overnight, tweeted on Friday night, Marco Rubio. He said this, Senator Warner, "I wish I could share more, but for now I can say it's pretty obvious to many that something is off with Putin. He has always been a killer, but his problem now is different and significant. It would be a mistake to assume that Putin would react the same way he would have 5 years ago." This is an open question. Is Putin a rational actor? What does our intelligence folks tell you?
Chuck, Chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I'm not going to comment on any specific intelligence. But what we do know is that over the last couple of years, Putin has been more and more isolated. He's not been in the Kremlin for the most part. He's been down at his place in Sochi or at his dacha outside of Moscow. And when you are an authoritarian leader and you have less and less inputs, and you're only hearing from people that want to say to the boss, hey, you're right, I think that leads to miscalculation. And I think that is what has happened in the case of his invasion in Ukraine.
Senator Portman, he went into Ukraine.
So yeah, there you see the Democratic chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee not really giving us an answer to what's wrong with Putin, but kind of giving us a sense that there is something wrong with Putin. And whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's the newsmaker response from the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I wanted to show you this other response to that same question later in the program, Meet the Press. Obama's ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, who's now at Stanford, was asked the same question by Chuck Todd, and there was some very unfortunate phrasing in his answer about Putin claiming that Vladimir Zelensky is a neo-Nazi, or that the Ukrainian government is run by neo-Nazis and drug addicts. And he says, well, how could Vladimir Zelensky be a neo-Nazi when he's a Jew and a drug addict? He puts like Jew and drug addict at the... Anyway, you'll see there's an unfortunate and drug addict in this answer. But otherwise, It is an important, informative answer from someone who has talked to Vladimir Putin and listened to Vladimir Putin many times, speaks Russian. The second, and this is the final clip on the main topic of bad news in Ukraine, before I get to the final newsmaker clip on the Supreme Court nomination. But anyway, here's Michael McFaul with some unfortunate phrasing, but good insight, talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press yesterday over here.
At all.
Ambassador McFaul, let's go to another way that this could end, and that is if Putin either recalculates, and maybe that's what these peace talks are about, or, as Admiral Stavridis said to me in my podcast, there's a Julius Caesar solution. What do you see right now with Putin, and do you think he's a rational actor right now?
You know, Chuck, that word rational actor is a very elastic, right? To get kicked out of SWIFT, as it happened to Russia yesterday, and then to have the president of Russia get in front of his generals and say, we need to prepare for a nuclear war, that doesn't sound very rational to me. I'm nervous that Mr. Putin has been believing his propaganda for decades. Remember, this guy's been in power for 22 years. Yeah. He doesn't listen to his aides. Even when I was ambassador 8 years ago, he was very dismissive of anybody around him. He's out at his compound, doesn't come into town very much, and under COVID, he's been more isolated. And if you watch and listen to him, and I met him in 1991. I've been watching him since he was prime minister in 1999. I sat in the room with him for 5 years when I worked in the Obama administration. I speak Russian, I listen to him, and I know what he says. He's increasingly unhinged in the way that he talks about the regime. Just yesterday, talking about Zelensky being a neo-Nazi. Let's remind everybody watching, he's Jewish, and a drug addict. That doesn't sound like somebody that's going to sit down and negotiate a peaceful outcome.
So if that's the case, then how do you create policy if you know he's an irrational actor?
Well, one, deterrence, of course. We need to be vigilant. This nuclear threat especially, I think we need to respond to. I would hope that General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, would be calling his counterpart today, Mr. Gerasimov, to clarify exactly what he meant by those statements. Number two, I think this is about the war. You know, the sanctions are great. I support them 100%, but they take months and years to have effect. Yeah. It's really about winning the war on the ground. We need to support the Ukrainians who are fighting. And three, if he succeeds in his ultimate objective, which is regime change, and force Zelensky out of power, arrest him, or kill him, we need to continue to support the resistance. I'm convinced, Chuck, there is no way that Ukrainians will submit to some kind of puppet regime from Russia. That is not going to happen. But to unravel that could take a long time.
Look, they've twice gotten rid of puppet regimes. Corey, it's been fascinating waking up.
And that's true. They have gotten rid of Putin puppets. That's one of the things I forgot to mention about Ian Pannell's report on this week with George Stephanopoulos. He did it from the square where they had the uprising that got rid of the last Russian puppet 8 years ago in 2014. And apparently Putin's been plotting to take back the Ukraine ever since. But anyway, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. But did you see how, like, at one point Michael McFaul said President Vladimir Zelensky is a Jew and a drug addict? That there was some unfortunate phrasing there. But otherwise, it's good analysis. And it's kind of scary that Vladimir Putin might have something going on that's making him irrational, or maybe it's just he's isolated. I mean, that's the great thing about democracy, is that our leaders change, and our leaders have to stay in touch with the people if they don't want to be thrown out. Vladimir Putin has been a dictator for like 22 years and has become more and more isolated and more, if you've watched he had that thing where he like berated his own chief of intelligence, and he doesn't like listen to anyone, and he has his like own convoluted views about Russian history and Soviet history, and that's the clip I showed last week where he like blamed Lenin for creating Ukraine and saying Ukraine wasn't even a real country and all that. And so that remains kind of a conundrum of this whole crisis as to what's wrong with Vladimir Putin. Is he a rational actor? And anyway, that is the last newsmaker clip on my main topic of the bad news in Ukraine, which has been kind of good news, but might not remain good news. I guess we'll have a lot more information by the time I do my live stream next Monday. But the secondary topic I wanted to cover real briefly was the good news for the Supreme Court, that they're finally getting some diversity, and it's the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is currently on the D.C. Court of Appeals. Several weeks ago, when the nomination first came up, I talked about the three finalists. One was a California Supreme Court justice, one was Ketanji Brown Jackson, another was a district court judge in South Carolina, J. Michelle Childs, who I was worried was going to be the nominee because she had the support of Lindsey Graham and also James Clyburn, the representative from South Carolina, who actually kind of saved Joe Biden during the primaries in 2020. Biden didn't do well in Iowa and New Hampshire, but then he got the endorsement of James Clyburn in South Carolina, and that was like the beginning of his winning streak, where he won the nomination and eventually the presidency, fair and square for all you Trump fans out there. Yeah, Joe Biden actually did win by millions of popular votes and dozens of electoral college votes. But here is James Clyburn, who was an advocate for this judge, J. Michelle Childs, who I just in the last week, some analysis came out that she was kind of pro-management. She had been a labor law lawyer at a firm before she became a judge, and I tried to look at the cases or the stuff she did myself, and I couldn't quite figure out when she was a labor lawyer, was she pro-management or pro-labor? And it turns out she was pro-management, which, pro-corporate. And she also, for some, I saw an analysis of the petition she did for people wanting to be released because of the threat of COVID, and she was actually not very compassionate. And I was kind of worried about her. And one of the great things about Ketanji Brown Jackson is her professional resume that James Clyburn talks about with Margaret Brennan in the final newsmaker clip. He says there are two words in his answer about Ketanji Brown Jackson here that don't appear anywhere else in all of the big five corporate outlet news programs. They're very important two words that I will tell you what they are after we watch that clip together over here.
2 years ago, South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn urged President Biden to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. Last week, the president fulfilled that promise and picked Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Congressman Clyburn joins us now from Santee, South Carolina. Good morning to you, Congressman.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
How important is it for President Biden to have this vote for this particular historic choice be bipartisan?
This is beyond politics. This is about the country, our pursuit of a more perfect union, and this is demonstrative of another step in that pursuit. And I would hope that all of my Republican friends will look upon it that way. Let's have a debate. Let's talk to her about her rulings and about her philosophy. But in the final analysis, let's have a strong bipartisan support to demonstrate that both parties are still in pursuit of perfection.
Congressman, you spoke very passionately the last time you were on this program about your first choice, a South Carolina native, Judge Michelle Childs. And one of the reasons you argued it was important to have someone like her, you said, was because she went to state schools. Judge Brown Jackson went to Harvard, an elite institution. Does that affect how you see this? Is it less powerful because of that?
It's more traditional. There's no question about that. This means that we will continue that tradition. And I am one, as you can see, that's not so much for tradition. I want to see us break as much new ground as possible. But having said that, we all have our personal preferences. We all have our regional biases. But in the final analysis, I think this was a good choice. It was a choice that brings onto the court a background and some experiences that nobody else on the court will have. And I think when you look at not just her background and the family life, but also her profession. She was a public defender. That adds a new perspective to the court.
And those were the two words, public defender. Public defender. For my longtime viewers, you know, I worked for about 5 years as a public defender. I dropped my Constitution. If you read your U.S. Constitution, the Sixth Amendment actually creates the job of public defender with the help of the Supreme Court case of Gideon versus Wainwright that says that regardless of your ability to pay, you have a right to counsel when you're accused of a crime. And the thing is, there's never been a public defender on the Supreme Court. The two words aren't black woman, and black woman is important diversity, and I talked about that several weeks ago when I talked about the good news of there being a black woman on the Supreme Court, and I'm all in favor of that. But the real diversity that I would like to see is having a public defender on the Supreme Court. There's never been one. The last person, even with criminal defense experience on the Supreme Court, was Thurgood Marshall, nominated in the 1960s before I was even born, and I'm a pretty fucking old, so excuse me, but I'm just telling you that it's not just the Supreme Court. The entire judiciary is heavily stacked with prosecutors. I would, when I practiced with criminal law in trial courts, I'd say like 75-80% of the judges I practiced in front of were former prosecutors. The whole system is heavily biased in favor of the prosecution, and Ketanji Brown Jackson was not only a federal public defender, and by the way, you know, Joe Biden, he wasn't my first choice as a presidential candidate, but one of the things I always liked about him is he also worked as a public defender, as the lawyer for the accused who can't afford a lawyer. Ketanji Brown Jackson, even when she was an undergraduate, she wrote her senior thesis about the coercive power of the whole plea bargaining process, which is kind of a travesty of justice that no one even really talks about or thinks about, that so many defendants are coerced into plea bargains when we should really be, you know, it makes our entire criminal legal system, which I don't even call a criminal justice system anymore, because it's not justice, it's just a criminal legal system, and it makes the whole thing more like it should be a due process machine where people are given due process and treated with respect, because I believe every person deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. It's one of my core philosophical beliefs, and that, you know, that doesn't mean that you can't punish people or imprison them or whatever after they've been given a fair trial, but the fair trial is the due process, and our criminal legal system is not a due process machine. It's an incarceration machine. It's a conviction machine. It's so heavily weighted to the prosecution. Anyway. So, the good news for the Supreme Court in the title of this video it's not just that there is a black woman nominated who's going to be confirmed, because she was already confirmed to the D.C. Court of Appeals like a year ago with multiple Republican votes. It's not just that. The good news, the real good news, diversity for the Supreme Court, is there's going to be a former public defender who has a different perspective on the criminal legal system. That is really important. And if you want to really understand the mass incarceration system, read this book that I have over my left shoulder for years and years and years, pretty much since the beginning of my Sunday live streams, never mind the Monday media mix-ups. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. If you don't believe that there's a mass incarceration system, read that book and try to refute the huge number of facts in it. Anyway, that is the end of my newsmaker clips. That's my good news for the Supreme Court, the diversity of not just the black woman, but the public defender. And as I promised, I am going to talk a little bit about Sandy. Normally this is where I would have my Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the Dandy fans out there. Dash, my cat, and Sandy, the dog. And, I tried to think about how did that whole thing start. I think it's because Sandy would, for my Sunday show, she would always come and lie down like right over there. She was like my one live studio audience before I even thought of, and so sometimes when she was lying there and kind of reacting, I would take pictures or little videos and I would show them at the end of the program, and people liked them, and people started demanding them, and eventually I tried to get the cat and the dog together, but anyway, so Sandy joined. Here is a picture of Sandy that when we were deciding to get Sandy, this is the advertisement for Sandy that we saw in late 2012. That's why there are all these sort of like Christmas decorations around this picture. It was the Dog Shack, this Bay Area dog rescue website where Sandy was advertised. And we got her in December 2012 from this woman Saskia, who's since moved back to the Netherlands, I think, and we paid. I guess Sandy was left out tied to a tree somewhere in Southern California, San Bernardino, and they raised money to fly her to this dog rescue place in Northern California, the Dog Shack. And I guess she was pregnant and had puppies, or I don't know why someone tied her to a tree out in San Bernardino, but we were told at the time she was a year and a half or 2 years old, so we figured she was born in mid-2011, but we don't really know. I mean, she was a great dog, and she might have been 11 or 12 or 13, I mean, who knows for sure. One of my favorite pictures of her is when we were at Lake Tahoe. This is a picture I took of Sandy in Lake Tahoe when she really liked going in the lake for some reason. That was I think back in 2016, so that's almost 6 years ago. And she got older and she had some problems. We had all these problems with Dash in November. I thought Dash was going to die, and he didn't eat for 2 weeks, and then he made this miraculous recovery, even though he's supposedly in his end of life times because he has pancreatitis and all these other problems. But Sandy, we had a few problems a few weeks ago. She was throwing up for a while, and we took her to the vet about a week before she died, and they did some tests and stuff and prescribed some medications and said she had fleas, which we never really saw. And I don't know if the new medications were the problem, but they did these blood tests that said she also had pancreatitis, she had anemia, She also had a urinary tract infection, and we were waiting to see what the bacteria was, and they were going to give her an antibiotic to do something about that. And you know, even after like a week or so of throwing up, she started getting better after she went to the vet, and we didn't really think that much of it. We thought she was improving, and then Tuesday morning, you know, last Monday I did a Dash and Sandy clip, and she seemed fine. And then Monday night she didn't eat. She stopped eating Monday night. Tuesday morning she was kind of like stumbling around, and she just like, you know, the way Dash lasted for a couple weeks and then made a recovery, I didn't think it would happen so fast. But she just like, she started stumbling around on Tuesday. She stopped eating Monday night. She started having this labored breathing. She was just lying there huffing and puffing and couldn't breathe. And so Monday night we tried to find an emergency room to bring her to, and you know, because of COVID, I guess they're all like understaffed and have people, you know, they can't really find people to staff them. We had to call around to like 3 different emergency rooms till we found one that's like half an hour away. And you know, we explained her problems, and we put her in the car. My wife took her, and during the 25-minute drive to the emergency room at the animal hospital, she actually died in the car last Tuesday night. And I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. I mean, I posted on my community tab, you know, down underneath the video description, the first thing is a link to this community post on my YouTube channel, and I was really appreciative of all the people who posted comments. You know, I think that before the live stream started, there were like 78 likes and 38 comments. I guess Sandy had fans all around the world, and because I showed the clips every week, people, you know, really felt a connection to her. But of course, we really miss her, and I don't really know what else to say about that. But I appreciate all of you who are making your comments about Sandy, and I got a few more super chat contributions, which I didn't even really expect her. But anyway, that is what happened to Sandy, and I don't know what to do at the end of it. Should I just do clips of Dash? Or, I mean, Sandy was the one who started the Dash and Sandy clips, because she was my one live studio audience viewers right over there, but she's gone now. But anyway, that is what happened to Sandy. And I will be back next Monday and through the midterm elections. And anyway, I guess I should finish up there, because I'm starting to get choked up thinking about it. But I appreciate all of Sandy's fans out there. And until next Monday or whatever, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.